Hello. In the last year, we discussed the first two Shmitas, and we started discussing the third Shmita, where Rav Naftali Hertz Zitzal, who was the Rav of Yafo at the time in the colonies, before the third Shmita, felt he had to go to Yerushalayim and discuss the issue with Rav Shmuel Salant and Rav Yehoshua Leib Diskin. And Rav Shmuel Salant did not want to issue a decision on this. He said that whatever Rav Diskin decided would be fine. When Rav Hertz discussed it with Rav Diskin, the greatest problem that they had was the problem of doch lo techanem, not allowing non-Jews to have settlement here. And so the way that they solved it was essentially to say that they would only sell land to people that were already living here and already had an income here. And secondly, that the sale would only be for a limited amount of time. There were three conditions, as we'll see in a minute. And then, Rabbi Yehuda Leib Diskin, he skimlo, when Rabbi Yehuda Leib Diskin agreed, again, I'm reading from Rav Tuktinsky's Sefer Shmita, Arach Hagon Rav Naftali Hertz Ksav Chose, Al Yidei שלושת ההיתרים הללו. Rav Hertz wrote a contract based upon the three following principles. Aleph, Mechira lizman. First, it has to only be a temporary sale. Beit, Mechira tilanos im shetach הקרקע Shiur יניקה, that he's selling the land, the trees, only with what they need to draw their sustenance and no more. Gimel, va'almanas לקוץ אילנות, that the non-Jew buying it has to cut down the trees. Ve'im lo יקוץ הקונה אילנות ad תחילת השנה השביעית. And if he doesn't cut them all down by the beginning of the Shmita year, as techel Mechira al guf הקרקע לביישנים, then will fall a sale on the land for 2 years. So it's not a direct sale, it's an indirect sale, and since the non-Jew never had any intention to cut down these trees, it would eventually, in this secondary way, the sale would occur. Ele shemefurash hitna hagon Rabbeinu Rabbi Yehoshua Leib Diskin can upirsim Rav Naftali Hertz she'enzu halacha kavua v'hirak horasha. But again, they announced, as they did in the first time they sold the land in the second Shmita of modern agriculture in Eretz Yisrael, that this is a horasha, this is a pasak only for this time, and not necessarily something that should be done constantly. So when the next Shmita arrived, Ubishnas Heter Samech Beis, 1902, Erev Shmita Revis, before the fourth Shmita, which begins in Heter Samech Gimel in the following year in 1903. Panashu v'Rav Naftali Hertz Goni Yerushalayim, Malasot lo ata im yichad yeshuvas Heter hakodmin v'nizdak lo hagon haderes itzal. When at this point Rav Shmuel Salant and Rav Diskin were no longer alive, the Rav of Yerushalayim was the Aderes, the father-in-law of Rav Kook, who had not yet arrived in Eretz Yisrael. He only becomes the Rav of Yafo after Rav Hertz passes away, in another year after the Shmita. So the Aderes, who was the Rav of Yerushalayim, wrote, because that Rabbi Yehoshua Leib Diskin agreed to selling land in the previous Shmita, kedaihu hagon Rabbi Yehoshua Leib Diskin saratar lismoch alav gam b'shmita zu. We can also rely on him on this Shmita because he was the prince of the Torah. Then, going on to the next, he groups all the Shmitos together between 1910, Tavresh Ayin, and 1945, Shin Hey. Lektufa Revis Nechnas Bayis Shmita B'Shnas Tavresh Samachtes, Erev Shmita Tavresh Ayin. So we now have again in 1909 discussions of what to do in the Shmita of 1910. As Himshich Hagon Marino Rav Avraham Yitzhak Cohen Cook Zitzal Rav Diafo Ve'amoshavos B'Tekufa Hu at the Mechira Ba'ofen Siduri. Rav Cook arranged the sale in a organized way. V'gam Hagom Mahari Cook Zitzal Shimshich Linhig at Masei Mechira. He continued to do the sale. Hayat noheg gam hu lichtov levarzem b'chol mechira sheheter nase lo ba'ofen kvua ela shuv letzorach sha'a. He also continued to write that the heter was not a set thing. It was only because that we still need it, or the farmers need it, or the people buying fruit need it. One or both of these things is in place, and it's still necessary for this time. Therefore, we are going to continue the Shmita, and so Rav Herzog continued it after Rav Kook as well. Now, there's one thing that Rav Tukachinsky writes later that's important to put in here, I think. And that is one of the important things that many Rabbanim felt is that the Shmita will be forgotten. The ideas of Shmita will be forgotten if we just sell all the land. And so Rav Kook also arranged that there would, on every farm, there would be some area that would not be sold. And in that area, they would keep Shmita properly. 100% of all the rules and not taking care of it in any way that would be prohibited during the Shmita. There, as we've learned, there are plenty of permitted things you can do in the Shmita, but everything that would be prohibited on Shmita would be done, at least in a small area, so the nature of Shmita would not be forgotten. Now, I want to go back and discuss for a minute who Rav Tukachinsky was, just to remind us, say a little more. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of Eitz Chaim. He was married to either the granddaughter or great-granddaughter of Shmuel Salant. I've seen both things. I'm convinced because of the ages it has to be a great-granddaughter. And he was also head of the political department of Badatz, of the Yeda Charedis. He was, when Rav Kook was a candidate when Rav Herzog was a candidate to be Rav Rashi, after Rav Kook passed away, one of the old Charomim in Yerushalayim was against anyone having secular studies, secular knowledge. And Rav Kook, of course, had acquired 5 PhDs. And Rav Tukachinsky traveled to Dublin to speak to Rav Herzog about this, and it was a 6-week trip in either way. You had to take a train to Alexandria, you had to wait for a boat that would take you from Alexandria to Marseille. You took a train across France, you took a boat across the English Channel, you took a train across England, you took a boat across the Irish Sea, and finally you arrived in Ireland. And after Shacharis, Rav Tukachinsky comes to Rav Herzog's house and speaks to him. There is an interview history that was done of Rav Herzog with his Rebbetzin shortly after he passed away, where she describes this meeting, and Rav Tukachinsky gives this long explanation of the tradition in Yerushalayim of banning secular education. So if the Rav would repudiate his PhDs, would return them, then everyone in Yerushalayim would accept Rav Herzog as the Rav. And Rav Herzog's response was, take me as I am or don't take me at all. And he escorted Rav Tukachinsky to the door. When Rav Tukachinsky returned to Yerushalayim, he became Rav Herzog's greatest supporter in the campaign for chief rabbi. He said, this person is the Rav, someone that's that strong and sure of himself. It's appropriate to be the Rav of Eretz Yisrael. But in any case, he was from the Yeda Charedis camp. He was in charge of their political department. And when he writes, the next section, the title is Hashmita b'tekufas chavlei Mashiach. The Shmita in the time period of the birth pangs of Mashiach. And he writes as follows: B'shmita chadesrei haba aleinu l'tov hashnas hey tavshin yud beis. In the 11th modern Shmita of the year Tavshin Yud Beis, which is 1952, Harishana b'Medinas Yisrael mechudeshes, the first one of the renewed state of Israel. Nechnesa she'la hashmita l'tufa chadasha. The questions of Shmita enter a new period. Chadasha legamrei b'chayamenu, completely new in the history of our people. Am Yisrael atika yomin, the people of Israel that are of ancient days, Baal Sefer HaSfarim, the owner of the Book of Books, Morei Ha'olam, the teacher of the world, Asher Halach v'Nadad Migola El Gola, that goad and wandered from exile to exile, Krov L'Alpaim Shana, close to 2,000 years. Limrot Pezurav Harabim, Bein Malchios Ad Yerot, oivim v'onim hen shekalu v'lohu. And they were scattered among many powerful nations that were their enemies, that afflicted them, but they were finished and not yet, meaning the nations that afflicted us ended, but not us. Suddenly began to show up the vision of their resurrection. She woke herself up to again be an independent nation in her land. And the scattered ones of Israel began to gather into Israel, to the state of Israel. And they gathered up the exiles. But the exile took them into strange atmospheres. The kaltu torot marniot, the ein lehem od musag marche Yisrael. They had absorbed bitter Torah, and they had no concept anymore of the eternal Jewish values, the enlightened and raised in lifted values. That life through them raises us up. Of this thing they had no knowledge. In this situation, how difficult and hard is it, the job of the rabbis in Eretz Yisrael, lishmor mishmeras hakodesh, to keep what is holy, bimtzaim betkumat medinat Yisrael hadoreshet pitronot l'rabim hashelot hadatiyot behetem lechukei Yisrael mishpatav, that requires us to come up with solutions to the many religious questions that are in line with the laws and statutes of Israel. V'arbei yitlabtu bekama ikronim im elementim chadashim hayeduim rak et ima ha'adama. And what do you do with those people that only now know the concept of Mother Earth? V'lama kol ma shemamal la, and how to work in it and how to transgress against it. Ubein kol habayot hadatiyot harabot talei gam bayat Shmita b'shlav chadash. And also, among all of these other things, comes the question of what do we do with the Shmita in this new situation? Mitzad halakha v'gam mitzad ma'amadenu b'hashkafenu olamenu. What do we do with the halach, and what do we do with our philosophical outlook to the world? Vadei shelo kulam tovsim et asher hitrachesh u'mitrachesh itanu kiyom. It is clear that not everyone understands what is happening and what has happened and what is happening with us today. Lo akol sigim ma omrim lanu hamurot hagadolim v'murot ha'atzumim shetachalo sivenu b'kirbenu b'shanim hallelu. Not everyone understands what the significance of the great events that have occurred around us and that surround us. Exactly how we deal with this new situation, he doesn't come to a complete answer for, but I would, in the next year, like to look at how the way Rav Tukuchinsky analyzes the arguments for and against the Heter Mechira from someone that lived through and was certainly a bar hachi, was certainly someone that was capable of evaluating the arguments of both sides, whether we should have a Mechira or not. And I'd like to contrast those maybe with how people think about these questions today. Everyone should have a wonderful day.